ready to put the chain tensioner back in. So, remember I showed you that before. This is that bolt that I cracked. When you take it out, careful because it's spring loaded. I'm going to take out that spring too. And then there is a little latch right here. Push that down, slide that all the way down. So it should look like that. And I'm going to keep the bolt out. Okay, I'm bringing you in closer to the chain tensioner to show you. So there's just a simple gasket. It should only go on there one way, but as long as it's covering what it's supposed to cover, you're in good shape. So that looks good to me. And then we're going to take our chain tensioner, and you will see that this will only go in one way too. So we're going to slide that in. Careful not to mess up our gasket, which I did. Trying to do this one-handed. And I'm going to take my bolts and work those in. And our next bolt, making sure I have both the gasket and the tensioner. And then we're gonna bolt that back into place. Okay, and then from that point we take that bolt with the spring that I told you about, and we're gonna place that. Should look just like that. If that spring comes out, it's fine, just put it right back in there. We're gonna slide it down that hole. And you're going to hear your tensioner click, 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 click all the way down there. And it's going to give that chain the tension that it deserves. And then we'll go ahead and tighten that back up. Don't go crazy, don't want to strip it. Okay, all right, now we're going to adjust the valves to make sure we have the proper valve clearance. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make sure that both valves have the proper clearance. So on the top here we have our intake valve, and on the bottom we have our exhaust. So what we need to do is take a 9mm. You're going to loosen this nut right here, which I've already done, but just loosen it until it's loose. And this one, I can't move it at all, so that clearance is way too close. So we're going to relieve that. What we want to do is get it to 0.004 or 0.1mm. So here's a feeler gauge. Let's try to catch you in the light there. And what we're looking for is 0.004. This is another one of those things that 8 people will tell you different answers on. With all my experience, 0.004 on both intake and exhaust is just fine and works great. So what we're going to do is we're going to get in here and adjust those clearances. So this is how we do that. I'm going to take a pliers, and they make tools for this, but again, this is your garage. I want to make sure tools that you might have. After you loosen that nut, there's a bolt inside of it with a square head. So I'm just going to take that and I'm going to turn it out until it's somewhat loose, and there I can feel it rocking back and forth. Hear it clicking, so now I know that I have a little bit of clearance. Now I'm going to take my 0.004 feeler gauge. I usually bend it just a little bit to get it in there. It's easier on the exhaust side anyway. And so I'm still too tight, so I'm going to turn that out until it drags just a little bit. And I don't want to go so hard where it hangs up. I want to turn it out until it drags just a little bit. So I'm going to hold it until I find that sweet spot where it just barely holds up. So I'm just going to leave it there. So I'm going to knead it in a second. And while I'm holding my exact position, I'm just going to simply tighten up that nut. Okay. And we're right where we need to be. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the exhaust side down here. I've already loosened that nut, and it seems like I have some clearance there, so I'm going to just go ahead and slide my feeler gauge in there. This is harder for you to see, and it's also hard for me to see. I've got my feeler gauge in there. I'm going to get it right where I need. Take my pliers, find that happy spot. I have to loosen that nut a little bit more. I didn't back it out enough, so. Take my pliers again. Okay, there we got a little bit of drag. I'll let that hang. I'm going to try to hold my position. Start tightening up that nut. Alright, let's check our clearance. Okay, that looks good. At this point, we're ready to put the valve cover back on. Some people use gasket maker or even put a gasket there. I don't. This is a new scooter. A lot of these have a gasket, little rubber seal built into them. This one's in perfect shape, so we are not going to make any kind of special gasket for it. So we're going to go ahead and put it on. Just install it, bolts in, and I'll get back to you once I have all my bolts in. One thing to point out on these newer 50cc scooters, you notice I didn't put the bolts in down here. And that is because if you saw the head earlier, there's no bolts to put there and there's no hole for the vacuum line. This is an emission system that we're completely removing. So basically there's no hole from this pipe to come all the way up in here and come out there. So that is gone now. These big bores won't run with them, so they don't have them. So if you get to this point, don't worry, this is okay. Alright guys, let's get the carburetor back on there. I have a gasket from the gasket set that came with the kit. We're going to go ahead and put that on the intake. And then I have the original grommet that came off of my original head. So we're going to put that on there. This one's in perfect shape. They're real rigid plastics. They typically do just fine. And then we're at a point where we can put the carburetor on. Alright, before you put your carburetor, intake, and all that back on, we need to put the plastic housing back on here. And there's that gasket that I referenced earlier. And so we just want to determine which way that goes. And then we want to just slowly work it in there. We want to be cautious that we don't damage it. I've had many scooters that didn't even have one of these on there because they've been broken and long gone, but they serve a purpose. So I like to keep them as intact as I can. Alright, at this point we've got our gasket on. We're going to put our bottom panel in. Just a little plastic piece should go in there. If it doesn't, just slowly work with it until it hits its spot and you'll feel it kind of clip into place a little bit. We'll take our top one, slide it on top just like we did the other. And there's a tab. This tab here on this side needs to go on the outside, and then on this side that has the clip, that's where the bolt goes, so we want that on the inside. You've got some things to go around and clear, so just work it in. There we go, it seems to be going right into place. Alright, I feel good about that. We're going to go ahead and bolt it all together.